He's Matt Moscona, afternoons ESPN in New Orleans and Baton Rouge. You can follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Moscona. Matt, hope all is well with you and the family and everyone is safe. How are you?
Hey, guys. Yeah, doing well. A lot of maybe hurt pride in Louisiana today, but aside from that, I think we're doing well.
Is it just that, Matt? Is it just hurt pride today? Because there's still a national title that has to be ringing in everyone's ears from the top to the bottom of Louisiana. So is it a tough Monday, or is it just kind of a fog Monday?
Fog is a good way to put it. And the Saints compounded it with their loss on Sunday Night Football. But I will say that doing post-game on Saturday was a bit odd because there was kind of some laughing and joking, and that's never normal on post-game shows after an LSU loss. So I think some of the afterglow of the championship still resonating with people. That's a real thing.
Especially since the governor was there to hoist the flag and then put it there above Tiger Stadium. Matt, the whole game, I kept waiting for the LSU defense to, be an LSU defense. Is it that the personnel's just not there? They're going to be too young this year, and this is going to happen 5 or 6 times? Or did the Pirate just school Bo Pelini? And they've coached against one another before. It's not like Bo hasn't seen this, but he hadn't seen it in over a decade, and the Pirate had a good day.
So I think there's two things that are both things have to be acknowledged. One is LSU not having Derek Stingley in that game is significant because it tilts the field. It kind of changes the math for LSU. If you have Stingley and you're trying to play man coverage, which is what Pelini did the whole day, Stingley erases a half of the field. And so that limits the windows and opens up more opportunities for the rest of the guys. Now you take Derek Stingley off the field, and it's fine. Ed Ogeron says next man up. We don't blink. He says it all the time. The reality is you got to know who the next man is, and the next man is never going to be as good as Derek Stingley. So not having Stingley impacted things, but maybe the most disappointing part defensively was they didn't try anything different. They stayed basically in man the whole game, and Mississippi State and KJ Costello were just brilliant at surgically taking underneath crossing routes and just catch and run. And it was just running free all day. At some point I would have expected a too high safety zone, a shell, something different, a different look for that Mississippi State offense to combat. And it never came. And that was disappointing. So that's to your point about did the Pirates school Bo Pelini? I don't think there's any question that happened on Saturday, and Mike Leach put the rest of the SEC on alert. You cannot sleep on the Mississippi schools anymore, because if you do, you will get embarrassed. And LSU got embarrassed Saturday.
For a while now, Matt, the West has been superior to the East. It just has. And I watched Tennessee and South Carolina, and there's no doubt that that's still the case. Florida looked very good, but Ole Miss had 600-plus yards in offense. Here's the Pirate doing it for Mississippi State. We know A&M's better. Auburn got it done against Kentucky, be it I think Kentucky outplayed them for large portions of that game. But LSU's in a spot right now where every game in the West outside of Arkansas, I don't know how you take any of them lightly right now, because this is a brand new SEC West, Matt.
The whole complexion has changed because, listen, it was – guys, when we looked at the schedule, I think LSU fans largely looked at 6 games and scribbled W's next to them. And there were 4 where you went, all right, let's see how those go. And those were at Florida, at Auburn, at A&M, and then home against Bama. And those 4 were really going to determine how LSU season went. Well, now you've lost to Mississippi State. You mentioned Lane Kiffin, although they gave up 50-51 to Florida. I mean, that offense was fun and explosive and creative. And it used to be where when the Mississippi schools popped up on the schedule, you could just sort of exhale. And that's not the case, guys. I'd even throw Arkansas in there because, look, I'm not a huge Felipe Franks fan. I'm sure y'all know a lot about him. He was committed to LSU for a long time as well. And obviously, LSU played Franks. But Franks, a veteran quarterback in that Kendall Briles offense, man, like, and maybe most surprising was defensively what they were able to do to Georgia for the bulk of that game. Arkansas even looked competent, which they haven't in a long time. I mean, the league hired 4 new coaches, and all of those 4 coaches look like already they've elevated the programs that they're at. There aren't a lot of layups in this league, if any, really.
Yeah, even Missouri played with Alabama. They made mistakes and cost themselves, but I didn't think they got embarrassed by Alabama at all. He's Matt Moscona, ESPN Afternoon Drive in both New Orleans and Baton Rouge. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Moscona. Listen, the Saints have had 1-2 and 2-2 starts in the past, and they've gone on winning streaks where they didn't lose for 2+ months. Do you think that that's still in this team, or are we seeing cracks in a Super Bowl or bust year where maybe they're just not going to measure up?
They got to get Michael Thomas back. He's just so important to what they do. I mean, there was a play on the field goal drive that the Saints had late in the ball game where Breeze threw a ball low to Traquan Smith over the middle and it bounced off his hands. As difficult a catch as it would have been, Mike Thomas makes that play. It's why he caught 149 balls last year. He catches everything within his radius. He's just the ultimate security blanket. And when you don't have him, it puts even more pressure. I mean, you see it. You see how much they're relying on Alvin Kamara. Finally, we saw Emmanuel Sanders and Drew Brees get on the same page yesterday. That was fun to watch because that's what I think many assumed Sanders would be as a complement to Mike Thomas. But look, to say that there's cracks, to me, this team looks and feels a lot like it's felt the past 3 or 4 years. You got to get Mike Thomas back, and we have seen these slow starts. So while it's concerning, it's also really hard to justify, throwing dirt on the team because we've seen. I mean, a year ago, they lose Drew Brees in week 2 and they go on a 5-game win streak. I mean, it's just there's talent on the team. There's good coaches on this team. They've got to get Mike Thomas back. He's just that important to what they do offensively. And if this thing lingers, 3, 4, 5 weeks, then that becomes really concerning because the really difficult stretch of the Saints schedule is still to come where you're going to play short weeks, where you're going to have another game against Tampa. You got Kansas City down the line. Like many of us thought the Saints could make their hay early in the season and be prepared for the gauntlet that was coming later. And right now, sitting at 1-2, I think is a surprise for a lot of people. Like they got to go beat Detroit this week. There's just not even an option that you've got to go get this game.
No doubt there. And Matt, it's, none of us are doctors and none of us stayed in the Holiday Inn Express, but when you're dealing with an injury like Thomas, there's none of us that really know when to put him back on because the worst thing everything you're saying is rush him back on the field. And we all know the worst thing you could do is rush him back on the field too early. So this is a fantastic dilemma that's at the hands of the coach and the medical staff of the Saints because you put him back 1 week early, you could lose him for the year. And the way you're talking, if that happens, they're done.
It's hard to imagine, based on what we've seen without Mike Thomas the last 2 weeks, that this is a team that could make that push. Obviously, they can get better throughout the year. I think we all understand that. But in the division, if there is a silver lining, the division is very much a 2-horse race with the Saints and with Tampa. And Saints have already beaten Tampa once. So they do have some wiggle room there to get in and say, let's be as healthy as we can be once we're into a new 17 playoff. But I think this team had grander ambitions of winning, the top seed. Of course, only one team gets the bye and home field advantage. So as the 1 seed this year. So I think that was the ambition of this team, was to be that team, have the road to the Super Bowl, go through the Superdome and get that bye for a veteran team. But they've left themselves after this start very little wiggle room. But as far as Mike Thomas's ankle injury, they saw it a year ago with Alvin Kamara too. Kamara had the ankle and the knee injuries, and I won't say they rushed him back, but he played injured most of the year, and it was obvious he wasn't himself. So it is a dilemma. And I don't have any great insight as to when Mike Thomas might return, but definitely hoping it's sooner than later. They got to buy in week 6, and ideally they'd have him back before then.
Listen, Sean Payton's a terrific coach, obviously. But having Michael Thomas on the field blocking in the final 2 minutes of a 17-point win is probably something he shouldn't do again. You know what he shouldn't do again, Matt? He shouldn't take Drew Brees off the field. I'm a little tired of the whole Taysom Hill, I'm going to run these plays. Quite frankly, that cost them the game last night. They make that fourth down stand. They've got a short field. They move the ball. They take Drew Brees off the field. You punch that ball in with that short field, you're up 7. You probably win the game. All right. Enough with the Taysom Hill at quarterback.
And they had scored three straight possessions. That's the really frustrating part of that is what you were doing was working so well. The counter argument is people say, but look at all the sparks that Taysom Hill has given you. And I agree with that. But the difference is the Saints have relied on Taysom Hill when they've needed an injection of life, and he's kind of been that, which is fantastic. And look, last year in the playoff game against Minnesota, he was the best player on the field. I mean, for New Orleans, I mean, he was the only player that got anything going against Minnesota's defense. But situationally, you have to acknowledge the fact that you didn't need that in that moment. You didn't need to change pace of what you were doing because what you were doing was working. I mean, there was no Kenny Clark. You were running the ball extremely effectively. They couldn't tackle Alvin Kamara. I mean, it was what you were doing was working. So in that moment, to have the change of pace, it's frustrating. But the thing that I always say, guys, and I've said this for years, as long as I've covered the Saints and covered Peyton, Peyton has this thing in him. Whatever it is, whatever that thing is that caused him in that moment to put Taysom Hill in the game is the same thing that has him do the trick play late in the game against Tampa and throw a touchdown pass, or onside kick to start the second half of the Super Bowl, right? Like that little bit of crazy, that little bit of reckless, it's paid off so many times for New Orleans that I've always said, hey, look, with Sean, you have to take the good with the bad, because while the bad is really bad and it's glaring and it's obvious, like when he challenges plays like a pissed off teenager just because he's upset and he wants to throw his flag and it costs his team a timeout. I mean, that happened last week against the Raiders, guys. I mean, he challenged the play against the Raiders. They had no chance of winning, and it cost him a timeout that would have been really helpful late in the game when they were trying to stop the clock to get the ball back to try to win. But it's Sean, man. You take the good with the bad when it comes to that mindset, and the Saints have felt both sides of that throughout his 15 years here.
All right. You said in the beginning, your post-game LSU, the calls were kind of laughing. Well, the good news is it's Vanderbilt, Missouri before Florida. For the Saints, it's the Lions, Chargers, and Panthers. And really the Bears, who no one trusts yet, but Nick Foles is playing. But the next three, I mean, the Saints are going to be obviously big favorites in all of these games. LSU is big favorites in the next two. If those aren't 5 victories, how quickly is the fog going to become anger in Louisiana?
Especially with LSU. I think in the NFL, there's an any given Sunday element that everybody acknowledges. And there, in over a 17-week season, everything is still in front of the Saints. But I agree, this is an opportunity to forge ahead in these next 3 games with a bye mixed in as well. But with LSU, if you lose to either Vanderbilt or Missouri, then you start to look around and go, okay, there's a real problem here. And I think the fear that nobody is really verbalizing this, because I think the way that Ed Orgeron is recruited it's going to build and sustain this program for a long time. But there are examples of teams that won championships basically with a cheat code on the field. I mean, look at Auburn in 2010. I mean, Cam Newton and Nick Fairley were human cheat codes on either side of the ball. They won a championship, and 2 years later, Gene Chiswick's fired. I don't we're not close to that here. Please don't misunderstand me. I mean, it was one game. It was an ugly game. But LSU still has no business losing to Vanderbilt or Missouri, because this program fancies itself as getting on the level where Clemson and Ohio State and Alabama are, to where no matter how many coaches, no matter how many coordinators, no matter how many first-round draft picks they lose, the next year they're right back in that conversation, the national conversation. And LSU was there in that conversation, and they deserve to be based on the season they had a year ago. But so far they're 0-1 and living up to that. So it's the rebuild versus reload conversation. And LSU, I think, was hoping that or expecting that they were in a reload situation. And after 1 week, that certainly doesn't seem to be the case.
Matt, once again, appreciate your time and your insight. All the best to you and your family. Stay safe.
Okay, guys, y'all have a great Monday.
Matt Moscona, weekday afternoons on ESPN Radio in both New Orleans and Baton Rouge. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt Moscona, Moscona. Matt Moscona joining us here on